Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into chapter 26 of the 4th Canto, following King Puranjana's intense and honestly pretty wild journey from a prideful hunter to a completely bewildered husband. If you're someone who loves getting the full picture, you are exactly in the right place. Our goal today is to cover every single verse of this fascinating chapter. We're not skipping a single drop of information. We're going to unpack this ancient Sanskrit text, verses 1 through 26, to reveal a totally timeless allegory about duty, desire, and the real-world consequences of our actions. To make sense of it all, we're going to break this chapter down chronologically into 6 distinct phases: the chariot and the hunt, karma, duty, and greed, devastation and return, the empty home, the bewildered king, and finally, pacifying the queen. Let's jump right in. Starting with section 1, the chariot and the hunt, covering verses 1 through 5. Right out of the gate, we're thrown into the action as King Puranjana mounts this incredibly complex chariot and heads into the forest. And guys, the sheer amount of numerical detail laid out in verses 1 to 3, 5 horses, 2 wheels, 1 axle, all the way up to 11 commanders, it isn't just some random inventory list. It serves as a brilliant, intricate allegory for the physical body, the senses, and the mind. Think of those commanders like an overwhelming management team trying to run the senses. The author is literally using the architecture of a chariot to map out the human vehicle. It's an ancient blueprint of how our consciousness interacts with the material world. But here is where the story takes a pretty dark turn. As we see in verses 4 and 5, King Puranjana leaves his queen behind. Now, symbolically, that means he's leaving behind his guiding intelligence. Driven by just immense pride and an absolute lust for the hunt, he adopts what the text literally calls a merciless, demonic nature. He completely abandons his better judgment, shows zero grace to the creatures of the forest, and just indiscriminately slaughters them with his sharp arrows. Moving right along to section 2, karma, duty, and greed, which spans verses 6 through 8. So the narrative actually hits pause right here to drop a really profound philosophical warning. Verses 6 through 8 draw this stark contrast between mindful action and reckless indulgence. On one side, you have hunting by rules. The text explains that if a person performs a prescribed duty with knowledge, there is no karmic bondage. They remain totally untouched by the action. But look at the flip side. Hunting by greed, acting out of pride and unchecked desire, which is exactly what the king is doing, leads directly to being bound by karma, suffering a complete loss of intelligence, and ultimately a massive fall from grace. Which brings us to section 3, devastation and exhausted return, covering verses 9 through 13.
Verses 9 and 10 get into the really grim reality of his actions in the forest. The text says the destruction was unbearable for any compassionate onlooker, specifically listing the slaughter of rabbits, boars, buffaloes, bison, and black deer. But what you really need to take away from this is the rebound effect. The king himself becomes overwhelmingly fatigued from all this killing. His reckless pursuit of pleasure actually results in immense physical and spiritual exhaustion.
And verses 11 to 13 brilliantly capture this relentless cycle of material desire. Just look at this 5-step sequence. First, he returns home entirely spent, thirsty, and tired. He bathes, eats, and rests up to cure his fatigue. But the second his energy returns, what happens? Step 4, he decorates himself with incense and garlands. And step 5, he immediately seeks out his queen with a mind completely attracted by Cupid. The sheer exhaustion pivots right back to sensual desire in a matter of hours, driving him to search for his wife. Okay, on to section 4, the empty home, verses 14 through 17. So, the king walks into his house, totally expecting comfort, but instead, he encounters a sudden, jarring domestic crisis. He notices right away that the house has lost its luster. Verses 14 and 16 show the king frantically interrogating the women of the inner chamber about his missing queen. He actually laments, "Where is she who saves me from the ocean of distress and enlightens my intelligence at every step?" In her absence, it hits him just how heavily he relies on her to maintain his sanity and his intellect. And right in the middle of this panic, verse 15 delivers this absolute gut punch of a quote. He says, "If there is no mother or wife in the home is like a broken chariot. Who would sit in it like a poor man?" This is such a beautiful motif that connects right back to the start of our explainer. Remember that incredibly complex chariot from verse 1? Well, now, without his queen, without his guiding intelligence, his allegorical chariot is entirely broken. The wealth and structure of the home literally mean nothing to him now.
The suspense finally breaks in verse 17, but it only heightens the drama. The women of the inner chamber answer the frantic king, telling him they honestly don't know what her intentions are. But they point out a shocking sight. His queen is lying right there on the bare ground, no bed, deep in a state of mourning and distress.
Section 5. The Bewildered King. This covers verses 18 through 20.
You get to watch this mighty hunter's complete psychological collapse unfold in real time. First, he sees his queen on the ground. Second, and this is such a key phrase from the text, his knowledge is destroyed by attachment. Poof, his grand philosophy and kingly ego just vanish. Third, with a heavy heart, he begins speaking sweetly to her. And fourth, the once proud king submissively approaches and slowly touches her feet. His material attachment has completely overpowered his status.
And that leads us into our final section, Section 6, Pacifying the Queen, wrapping up the chapter with verses 21 through 26. In verses 21 and 22, he's desperate. He tries a psychological tactic, telling her, punishment from a master is a great favor. A foolish person doesn't understand this duty of a friend. He's trying to frame her anger not as a rejection, but as a loving punishment. He is actively demoting himself, recognizing her as his ultimate master and a true friend who is just doing her duty by disciplining him.
By verse 23, his deep, blinding infatuation is just pouring out. He begs to see her face smiling with love and bashfulness again. He vividly praises her physical beauty, specifically pointing out her blue hair and her raised nose. He pleads for her to just speak sweet words to him. He's desperately longing for her affection to return to normal because he just cannot handle the friction of her displeasure.
Now, verse 24 contains a truly fascinating cultural and spiritual caveat. He proudly declares that he will severely punish anyone in the entire world who has offended her. But he lists an exception. He exempts the Busura Kulit, meaning the Brahmanas or priestly class, and the servants of Murari, meaning Krishna or the Supreme Lord. It's so interesting because even in the blinding rage of his infatuation, his embedded cultural knowledge forces him to acknowledge the supreme protection of the divine and the sacred classes. It's a very specific line he just refuses to cross.
Moving into verse 25, the text paints this vivid, honestly heartbreaking picture of the queen's sorrow. He laments seeing her face dirty, angry, and completely without its usual luster. He notices she's missing her usual tilaka markings and that she is soaking wet with her own tears. This contrast shows just how deeply her physical state of grief impacts the king's own state of mind. He is entirely undone by her sadness.
And finally, verse 26. The chapter concludes with his total, absolute surrender. Please be pleased with me. What woman would not accept her husband who is under the control of Cupid and has lost his gravity? He fully admits his faults here. He admits he went hunting out of pure addiction and that he is completely overcome by his desires, literally under the control of Cupid. He leverages his own pathetic state, his loss of gravity and seriousness, as the very reason she should show him some mercy.
So what does this all mean for us? I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If a mighty king, equipped with the most complex chariot and immense worldly power, can be so easily bound by pride in the forest and so utterly broken by attachment in the home, what does this tell us about the hidden chariots we drive every single day? Think about the desires that exhaust you and the attachments that bewilder you. It's a mirror reflecting our own daily lives. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and keep questioning the chariots you choose to ride.
Imagine handing the keys of like a high-performance 12-cylinder Ferrari to a blindfolded 5-year-old.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a terrifying image.
Right, and then you just point them toward a cliff and hope for the best.
That is incredibly bleak.
It is, but I mean, that terrifying scenario is essentially how a 5,000-year-old text views your daily decision-making process when your ego is in the driver's seat.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate way to sum it up.
So, welcome to another deep dive. Our mission for you today is to basically decode the mechanics of that exact scenario. We are exploring 26 verses from an ancient, deeply captivating Sanskrit text.
Right, the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Exactly. Specifically, Canto 4, Chapter 26. We're looking at the story of King Puranjana.
Yeah, and for listeners who are, familiar with Vedic texts, they know these authors frequently use the imagery of physical battles or grand journeys to map out these really intense internal cognitive struggles.
Right, it's rarely just a simple story on the surface.
No, not at all. And the story of King Puranjana, which takes up this whole section, is a prime example of that. Because on the surface, It reads as this hyper-violent historical drama, about a king going on a brutal hunting trip and then coming home to a totally devastated household.
But beneath that surface, it's actually this profound allegory about human desire.
Exactly. It serves as a highly technical, almost architectural schematic of the human mind.
Yeah, a story that dissects the mechanics of the mind and the inevitable crash that follows unchecked actions. So, okay, let's unpack this. We begin with verses 1 through 5 and then 9 and 10, which outline Puranjana's departure to the forests of Pancaprastha.
Right, the hunting trip.
Yeah, but before the text even gets to the hunt, it spends an immense amount of time detailing the king's chariot.
A staggering amount of detail.
It really is. And it does this with this bizarre, almost obsessive focus on mathematics. I'm going to read this list because it's wild.
Go for it.
It lists 5 horses, 2 shafts, 2 wheels, 1 axle, 3 flags, 5 bands, 1 rein, 1 driver, 1 seat, 2 poles, 5 weapons, 7 coverings, and 5 distinct styles of movement.
It sounds like someone intensely reciting the spec sheet of a heavily tricked-out luxury sports car.
Literally. Like a sales pitch for a tank. And he's wearing golden armor, he carries an inexhaustible quiver of arrows, and he's led by 11 commanders. I mean, this is way too specific to just be a literal chariot. What are we actually looking at here?
Well, what's fascinating here is that we aren't looking at a literal chariot at all. The text is providing a comprehensive anatomical and psychological blueprint of the human apparatus.
The human body.
Yeah, the body and the mind. So those 5 horses pulling the chariot, they represent the 5 physical senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch.
Okay, that makes sense. Pulling you in different directions.
Right. And then the text goes on to mention the king is led by 11 commanders. That maps to the 10 senses, so 5 for acquiring knowledge and 5 for working, plus the mind functioning as the 11th commander.
Oh, wow. So every single axle, flag, and covering is actually an ancient method of categorizing the physiological and cognitive layers we use to navigate the material world.
Exactly. It shows what happens when our senses dictate our actions. Because Puranjana is the soul, or the consciousness, sitting in the seat of this hyper-complex biological machine.
And he takes this machine out to hunt. But I struggle a bit with the framing of what happens next, to be honest.
How so?
Well, the text describes him acting with a cruel, merciless, and, quote, demoniac nature. He abandons his innocent wife just to go into the forest because he's addicted to the hunt.
Right, he just bulldozes over his better judgment.
Yeah, and he slaughters this escalating list of animals. It specifies rabbits, boars, buffalo, bison, ruru deer, and porcupines. And he kills until he is entirely exhausted, causing a devastation that the text says is unbearable for compassionate onlookers.
It is a really brutal scene.
It is. But why are the senses and ambition painted as inherently villainous here? I mean, isn't a king supposed to hunt and conquer?
Well, the complication there is understanding the difference between utility and addiction.
Okay.
The text isn't arguing that having senses or even using them makes someone demoniac. The issue is the mechanism of sensory escalation. Look at the progression of the animals he hunts.
Right, from rabbits up to bison.
Exactly. He starts with a rabbit, moves to a boar, scales up to a buffalo and a bison. It is the ancient equivalent of doom scrolling.
Oh man, doom scrolling with a bow and arrow.
Yeah, because the mind, when disconnected from higher intelligence, which is represented here by the wife you abandon, requires increasingly intense, violent stimuli just to feel anything at all.
So he's hunting for sustenance.
No, not at all.
Now.
He is hunting because he is chained to the steering wheel of a machine that only knows how to consume.
Right, the adrenaline of that hunt just completely dictates his reality.
Yeah, it's like-
But you know, adrenaline has a shelf life. The narrative suddenly hits the brakes in verses 6 through 8. In the middle of all this violent, chaotic action, the text zooms out to provide a philosophical framework for exactly why his actions are so destructive.
Yeah, this is a crucial pivot in the chapter.
It states that if a king hunts in approved holy places, targets only necessary animals, and adheres to strict regulations, he is not implicated or bound by the karma of that action.
Right, which completely reframes the nature of his crime.
Right, so the text says when a learned person performs regulated actions, they remain free. But if someone acts otherwise driven by pride and ego, they fall into the flow of the material modes, they lose their intelligence, and they degrade.
Yeah, it's presenting this very specific ancient worldview impartially. The philosophy of karma presented here posits that action itself isn't the trap. The trap is unregulated, ego-driven action.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us today? Because, our listeners aren't generally out spearing bison in the forest.
Hopefully not.
Right. So does this imply that any action done purely out of ego binds us, while mindful, regulated action keeps us free.
Yeah, it's entirely about intention and regulation. The text is teaching that when we operate purely on impulse and pride, like Puranjana's hunt, we literally, as the text says, lose our intelligence.
We degrade into these material modes.
Exactly. Those material modes basically describe our primal, hardwired habit loops. We trigger them whenever we remove the friction of regulation from our lives.
Friction preserves our consciousness.
It does. The text advocates for rules like hunting only in specific places for specific reasons, because that friction stops us from running on pure habit. When we chase the next dopamine hit, the next corporate promotion, or, just external validation without any internal regulation, we carve deep grooves into our psychology.
We become trapped by our own habits and attachments.
Yeah. We think we are conquering our environment, just as Puranjana thought he was conquering the forest. But in reality, our senses are the engines, and without the intellect steering, those engines will drive us straight off a cliff just to maintain momentum.
Man. And that momentum inevitably runs out, which brings us to verses 11 through 17. We see the immediate aftermath of this unchecked ego.
The dopamine crash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The high of the hunt fades, fatigue sets in, and his uncontrolled desires pivot sharply from violence to lust. He returns home hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. He bathes, eats, and adorns himself with incense, sandalwood paste, and flower garlands.
Getting his physical house in order.
Right. But the moment his basic physical needs are met, the text says his mind is pulled by Cupid by lust. He immediately seeks out his queen. But he can't find her anywhere.
The whiplash there is just profound.
It is. Out in the forest, he was this proud, untouchable conqueror in his mathematically flawless, unstoppable chariot. But the second he crosses the threshold of his home, he's totally lost. He anxiously questions the women of the inner apartments. And he makes this striking admission. He laments that a house without a devoted wife or mother is like a chariot without wheels, or a broken chariot. And he asks how a wise man can sit in it like a wretched person.
It's so ironic.
He openly acknowledges she is the one who saves him from drowning in the ocean of distress, illuminating his intelligence at every step.
Yeah, that irony is the core lesson of the allegory. He took his magnificent physical chariot out into the world to prove his independence and his power. Yet, without his higher intelligence, without the grounding force of his queen, he realizes his entire existence is a broken chariot.
Right. It shows how fragile an ego built on sense gratification truly is.
It crumbles instantly.
And then the maids deliver the blow. They reveal she isn't waiting to greet him with open arms. She is lying on the bare floor without any bedding.
Yeah.
It totally mirrors that modern whiplash of coming home from a massive ego-boosting work trip, Like, you're the boss, you conquered the boardroom, and you walk in the door only to realize you've deeply neglected your home life and your partner has packed their bags.
That modern parallel perfectly captures the collapse. The text uses the image of the queen on the bare floor to visualize the state of his neglected intellect and conscience.
Because he abandoned it.
Right. While he was out adorning his physical body with golden armor, and later, with the sandalwood paste, his higher self was starved, stripped of comfort, and literally left on the cold ground.
Wow. And verses 18 through 26 detail the fallout of that realization. Puranjana finally finds his wife, and we witness his complete psychological disintegration.
That total collapse.
The tough, merciless hunter completely evaporates, and he just surrenders to his attachment. Seeing her on the bare ground, his composure is entirely destroyed. He tries to pacify her with sweet words. He touches her feet.
He completely subverts his own identity. Minutes earlier, he was the supreme dictator of the forest, deciding which creatures lived or died.
Right.
Now he is adopting the posture of a beggar.
He even argues that punishment from a master is actually a, quote, supreme favor. That's in verses 21 and 22.
Yeah, asking to be disciplined by the very intelligence he discarded.
And he begs to see her face. In verse 23, he asks to see her adorned with smiles, bashful glances, her black hair, and her raised nose.
Even in his submission, he's still interacting with the world entirely through his senses.
Yes, he's just pivoting from one sense gratification to another. And then he tries to reclaim a shred of his masculine authority. He makes this grandiose vow in verse 24 that he will punish anyone who has offended her.
Ah, yes. The vow.
But he immediately undercuts his own vow with these highly specific caveats. He swears to destroy her enemies, with two strict exceptions.
Right.
He won't punish them if the offender is a Brahmana, an earthly god or priest, or a servant of the enemy of Mura, which refers to Vishnu.
Right.
Why make this dramatic, sweeping vow of vengeance and then immediately carve out technical religious exceptions?
Well, we have to treat this impartially as the worldview of the source text, right? The text is illustrating the depth of his cultural conditioning. The ancient authors understood the universe to have clear spiritual hierarchies.
Okay, so it's ingrained in him.
Exactly. Puranjana is having a complete emotional breakdown. He is groveling on the floor. Yet his fear of crossing those specific spiritual lines, offending a Brahmana or Vishnu, is so deeply hardwired into his consciousness that it overrides his panic. Even as his ego shatters, the institutional boundaries of his world remain intact in his speech.
That's fascinating. So he pivots right back to Lamentation in verse 25. He laments her disheveled state. She has no tilaka on her forehead. She's dirty, angry, and her red lips are lacking their usual saffron glow.
Just focusing on the physical again.
Always the physical. And it all builds to verse 26, which is his final act of submission. He begs forgiveness for his hunting addiction. He admits he is completely defeated. But here's where it gets really interesting.
The excuse?
Yes, listen to the excuse he uses. He claims his manliness has been conquered by, quote, Cupid's flower arrows, and he begs her to serve him since he is entirely under her control.
This raises an important question, doesn't it, about how unchecked external ambition leaves us spiritually and emotionally bankrupt. The abdication of personal responsibility here is just staggering.
It's incredible hypocrisy. He tries to sound tough by vowing to punish her enemies, but in the exact same breath, he completely abdicates all personal responsibility for his own actions.
Right. Yeah.
He essentially says, I didn't choose to abandon you and slaughter a forest full of animals. Cupid's flower arrows made me do it.
Yeah, he's playing the victim. The text perfectly illustrates how individuals who fail to control their own senses are ultimately forced to grovel to the very material attachments they thought they were mastering.
He thought he was in charge.
Puranjana completely believed he was commanding his chariot. In truth, the chariot was driving him. When we blame external factors for our internal failings, when we say, oh, I was just stressed, or the dopamine made me do it, we are echoing Puranjana, blaming Cupid's flower arrows.
Wow.
We are admitting that our senses have conquered our intellect.
Man, that is a powerful realization. We just mapped a massive psychological arc across 26 ancient verses.
We really did.
We looked at the hyper-specific mathematical chariot of the senses. We analyzed the bloody hunt driven by ego and how the ancient philosophical rules of karma and regulation point out that unregulated action alters our consciousness.
Yeah, it changes who we are.
And we explored the dramatic domestic collapse, that dopamine crash that turns a conqueror into a dependent, trying to excuse his own weakness.
The brilliance of this whole Pancaprastha forest sequence lies in its relevance. The mechanics of the mind, they haven't changed in 5,000 years.
Great.
The human apparatus still craves momentum, and without friction, without that regulation, it still drives straight toward destruction.
So, take a hard look at your own chariot today. Consider the 11 commanders and the 5 horses pulling you forward. Are you actively driving it, utilizing friction and regulation? Or are your senses running wild, chasing escalating obsessions while you neglect what truly matters?
Recognizing the state of the vehicle is pretty much the only way to avoid the crash.
Yeah. And that brings us to one final, unexplored thought to ponder today. If King Puranjana represents the soul, and his intricate chariot represents the physical body, who does the queen actually represent in your own psychological makeup? Is she just your earthly relationships? Or is she your higher intelligence, your conscience, or your deepest capacity for spiritual wisdom? And if so, what queen have you left lying on the bare cold floor today while you were out chasing external validations?
That is a lot to think about.
It is. Until you know for sure, be careful with those horses. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.